Masechet Yevamot Daf Kof Yod Chet, and with this daf we complete the 15th perek. We start with the Mishnah. Achat omeret met, v'achat omeret lo met. A man is married to two women, and one of the women testifies that our husband is dead, and the other one says, no, he is still alive, he did not die. So what's the verdict? A contradictory testimony. The one who testified that her husband is dead, well, we believe her, like in a normal case. A wife is believed to say her husband is dead, and she can remarry. Not only that, she can also receive her ketubah, as we saw earlier. Whereas the other co-wife who says, our husband did not die, so she will not be permitted to remarry, and she will not get the ketubah, which makes sense because she doesn't believe that the husband is dead. So for sure, the testimony of one co-wife to say he's dead will not affect the other. Right? We talked about a case earlier of where one co-wife said he's dead, and the other co-wife doesn't say anything at all. So co-wives are not believed for each other because co-wives generally hate each other. And we suspect that one may be lying and saying our husband is dead so that the other will remarry and put her into a difficult predicament. The Gemara will compare that case with this and explain why we even need this case. If we don't believe a co-wife who says our husband died when the other one doesn't say anything at all, then for sure, if the other one says no, he did not die, then for sure she cannot remarry. So what's the point of this case? We'll see. Next case, achat omeret met v'achat omeret neherag. One of the co-wives says our husband died in a normal way, he was sick, and the other one says he was killed. Rabbi Meir omer ho'ilu machishot zo et zo hare elu lo yinasu. Rabbi Meir says since they contradict each other, neither of them can get remarried. Interesting. Even though they both agree that he's dead, but they disagree on the manner of his death. And so at least one of them has to be lying, because either he died on his own or he was killed. So this is a problem for the Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara is going to ask, yeah, but in the previous case, don't they also contradict each other? That's even a bigger contradiction when one says he died and one says he doesn't die. So what would Rabbi Meir say about that? We're going to end up having to deal with the authorship and saying that maybe the first opinion is not to be made. Maybe to be made would in fact disagree with the first also because they contradict. Okay, but that's only one opinion. Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Shimon omerim ho'il v'zo modo she'en kayam yinasu. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon disagree with Rabbi Meir, and they say since they agree that he is no longer here, and one way or another, either he died on his own or he was killed, but the point is he's not here, so they can both get remarried, and we don't consider this, we don't worry about the contradiction about the details. Okay, next case. Ayed omer met, ve'ayed omer lo met. Now we're not talking about the wives, but rather one witness says this guy is dead, and one witness says the guy is not dead. Or isha omeret, one woman, not necessarily the wives, says met, v'isha omeret lo met. One says died, and one says he did not die. Harezo lo tinase. Then the wife cannot get remarried. This is a little different than the case we've seen before, where one witness comes and says he died, and then the court authorizes her and say, okay, you can get remarried now. And Ula earlier said, well, then even if another witness comes and says you cannot get remarried, that doesn't undo the permission that was given already. So therefore, this case must be talking about where the two witnesses come one right after the other before the court gets a chance to process them. And now we simply have two contradictory witnesses, so we can't trust one over the other and allow her to remarry. All right, now the Gemara is going to ask about the first clause. Tama damra lo met ha ishtika. The reason why when one wife, a man is married to two wives, one wife says he died, the reason why the other wife cannot get remarried is because the second co-wife said he did not die. So she contradicts it. She says he did not die. She is adding a prohibition upon herself. But we can infer from this that ha'ishtika, if the second co-wife was simply quiet, then tinaseh, then she could get remarried based on the testimony of the first wife. But that doesn't make sense. We saw in the previous Mishnah that a co-wife is not believed to testify on behalf of her other co-wife because they hate each other and she may be lying. So why would this Mishnah mention the case where the second co-wife says he did not die? Even if she was quiet, she would not be able to be remarried. And the answer is, Lo met istadich aleh. Actually, we do need both cases. Both where the second co-wife is quiet, you can't trust the first wife because she may be lying to get her in trouble. And we need to this case, even this case, because I might have thought that in this case, we would rely on the testimony of the first wife that said that our husband is dead, when the second one contradicts, paradoxically. Why would we think that? Sakada techamina ha mayit, veha de kamra lo met lekilkola l'sara hi de mi de kamichavena. Perhaps, in fact, the husband, in fact, died. And when the second co-wife, and a second co-wife knows that he died, but when she says, no, he didn't die, she is only saying that to mess up the first co-wife. By saying, no, he didn't die, and that would contradict her testimony. The first co-wife really wants to get remarried. And maybe she has a guy in mind, or whatever it is. And now, by the second co-wife saying, no, he didn't die, she will mess up the co-wife. Now, even though that will also mess her up herself, now she won't be able to remarry either. She may hate her co-wife so much that she may be willing to lie and put herself in a problematic situation just to annoy her co-wife. And that would apply the principle of Tamut nafsha, aim pelishtim kamra kamashmatlan. Regarding Shimshon, Pasuk says, I will die with the Pelishtim. He brings down the pillars and the whole building falls upon him, so he kills himself. And he says, I don't mind killing myself as long as these Pelishtim will die. So that's the principle. And so she can apply that to herself and say, I'm going to contradict her and say our husband didn't die, even though I won't be able to remarry as long as she won't be able to remarry. And based on that, we should reject her testimony because it's based on hatred. And therefore, we might have thought that we would allow the second co-wife to remarry, which is kind of crazy. Even though she says, no, my husband didn't die, we say, we don't believe you, you can go remarry. Anyway, we might have thought that, Kamash Malan, and that's why this Mishnah teaches this case as well, that whether the second co-wife is quiet or whether she contradicts and says her husband did not die, either way, she cannot remarry, but the first co-wife who said, my husband is dead, she can remarry. Okay, next case. Achat omeret met. One wife says he died, and one says he was killed. And there we have machloket. It says they contradict each other, so we do not trust them. So question, how come Rabbi Meir does not argue in the first case, where there's an even bigger contradiction? One says he died, and one says he didn't die, so then you should not believe either of them, according to Rabbi Meir. All the more so, if he doesn't believe when they say one he died, and one says he was killed. Amar Rabbi Elazar. So now we're going to have two interpretations of how to answer this. Two answers. Amar Rabbi Elazar. V'machloket shenuya. V'Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbi Shimon. In fact, yes, Rabbi Meir would disagree with the Resha. But the Resha is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who did talk about the second case, and they say, since they're in agreement that he died, so then she can get remarried, and they don't mind. They ignore the contradiction, and so they are the authors of the first case, where even though they contradict, they still accept half the testimony for the woman that said he died. So that's the opinion. But Rabbi Meir, even though it doesn't say it in fact, he would disagree in that first case. Okay, that's what Rabbi Elazar thinks. However, Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rabbi Elazar's attributions, and he says, Amad afilu te'amad Rabbi Meir, I can even say that the first case is Rabbi Meir and is agreed upon by everyone. Because Rabbi Meir would say, anytime someone says he did not die, regarding testimony for a woman to remarry, that's not considered contradictory. If one says he died and one says he was killed, that's contradictory because either he died one way or another. But the wife who says he did not die, well, she's simply kind of continuing the previous state because he was alive, so maybe she just doesn't know that he died yet. Or maybe she is lying for the reasons that we said above. Whereas if one says he died, one says he was killed, so there's no reason to lie because the outcome is going to be the same, that he's not around, he's dead. And so therefore we do not consider lo met to be a contradiction. It is a contradiction and will have a different effect on the one who says it, but we don't care about it to contradict the testimony of the first wife who says he died. So it could even be to be me'ir. All right. Now, Tenan, we have a challenge to this. Ayed omer met ve'ayed omer lo met. The end of our Mishnah talked about one witness says he's dead, one witness says he's not. Isha omeret met ve'isha omeret lo met. Or a woman says he died and a woman says he did not die. Hadezo lo tinaseh. So the court cannot trust one over the other. She cannot remarry. Bishlama l'Rabbi Elazar, sitama ke'Rabbi Meir, ela Rabbi Yochanan kashya. So we understand the last case according to Rabbi Elazar, who said that the anonymous last case of the Mishnah, according to Rabbi Elazar, could very well be Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir stated that whenever there's a contradiction of any kind, we throw out both parts of the testimony, and so therefore, when was one witness against another, then this could be the opinion of Rabbi Meir. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, who thinks that Rabbi Meir only has a problem with contradictory testimony if it's in the details of he died or he was killed. But according to Rabbi Meir, if one says he died and one says he didn't die, we do not consider that to be a contradiction, and we trust the one who said that he did die. So according to that, then the last part of the Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Meir, and it can't be Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon either. And so we have a difficulty in attributing the last part of the Mishnah according to either one, if we follow Rabbi Yochanan, and we do not have an answer to this problem. All right, the next Mishnah is going to talk about a similar case, but add one more complication of where this husband is a Kohen, and the question is, can these co-wives continue to eat terumah? So we have a case. A woman and her husband go on a trip. She comes back and says, oh, my husband died on the trip. So of course we believe her. She can remarry. She receives her ketubah, as we said before. And if she has a co-wife, if the man was married to two wives and the co-wife was not away and she didn't know anything, we do not trust the testimony of the first wife to permit the second wife. If that second wife was a Bat Yisrael married to and the husband was a Kohen, that means during the marriage she's allowed to eat terumah. So tochal bitrumah dibre bitarfon. For the second wife, she can continue to eat terumah according to the bitarfon. The first wife, she already left. She said, my husband is dead. She can remarry. She's no longer connected. Obviously, she doesn't want to continue to terumah. She got her ketubah and she's gone. But regarding the second wife, the bitarfon's chidush is that we don't believe the first wife regarding the second wife, not only lechumrah, but also lekula, not only to prohibit the second wife from remarrying and collecting her ketubah, but also we allow her to continue eating terumah as if the husband is still alive, which is quite amazing. Because for one wife, go get remarried, no problem, not adultery or anything. And the second wife, continuing to eat terumah. Bitafon, that's the way it is. We accept one testimony for her, but not for the other. Rabbi Akiva says, this is not a good way to remove someone from transgression. We have to be more careful. Rather, you're right, we don't trust the testimony of the first wife regarding the second wife, but that's lechumrah. So we are not going to allow her to get remarried. But we do have to worry that maybe she's telling the truth, and we trust the first wife for herself, and therefore it will be sufficiently trustworthy to prohibit the co-wife from eating terumah, because maybe he's in fact dead and she goes back to being a Bat Yisrael. Okay, so that's Rabbi Akiva. Now, with this machloket applies in the second case as well. Amra met li ba'ali v'achar kach met chami tinase v'titol ketubata v'chamota asura. If a woman goes away on a trip with her husband and her father-in-law, and she comes back and says, my husband died, and after that, my father-in-law also died. So Tina, she's believed regarding herself, so she can get remarried. V'titol ketubata, and she collects a ketubah. V'chamota asura. However, her mother-in-law cannot remarry, because this is the same principle we saw regarding the 5 people who we don't trust because they hate each other, and this daughter-in-law is not trusted to permit her mother-in-law to remarry. So that would be the same. If that mother-in-law herself was a Bat Yisrael, married to a Kohen, she can continue eating terumah. So again, the Bitarfon says, we believe the testimony of a wife for herself, and we don't believe it at all, l'chumra and l'kula, for regarding the mother-in-law. She cannot remarry, and she continues eating terumah as if her husband is alive. Rabbi Akiva Omer, en zo derech mosia midavera. Rabbi Akiva says you can't remove a person from transgression just by doing that. There's something wrong here. Rather, we trust the testimony of the daughter-in-law, l'chumra, to say that the l'chumra both ways, so that the mother-in-law cannot remarry. We assume he's alive, but she's also not allowed to eat terumah because maybe he's in fact dead, and therefore her connection to the Kohen is no longer around. Okay, so we see the machloket applied in 2 cases regarding co-wives and regarding a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. So the Gemara is wondering, why do we need both? Isn't it basically the same principle? Both of these are cases where people hate each other, and we don't trust them. Usricha, so the Gemara says, no, we need both. Di'it marhach kamaita beha ka'amar bitarfon mishum desara de gufa. If I only had the first one regarding co-wives, so then Rabbi Tarfon says we totally disbelieve one co-wife to the other, even to the extent that the second one can continue eating terumah. There, Rabbi Tarfon says, because they really hate each other, because co-wives hate each other physically, they cause physical harm to each other, they're sharing a husband, and so therefore, it's more likely that the co-wife would be totally lying, and that's why we can disregard her testimony altogether for the co-wife, and she can continue eating terumah. But the hatred of a daughter-in-law for her mother-in-law is less, because it's only regarding words. It's only because the mother-in-law says negative things to her son about his wife, and so it's not the hate is not as much. Emma Modila Rabbi Akiva might have thought that in that case we don't assume that the daughter-in-law is totally lying, and therefore we have to suspect that she's telling the truth, and maybe Rabbi Tarfon would agree with Rabbi Akiva and prohibit her from eating terumah. So that's why I need to say the second case as well, that even there, Rabbi Tarfon says we totally disregard the testimony of the daughter-in-law. And the other way around also, v'itmar beha, and if I only said the second case, Beha Ka'amar Rabbi Akiva, in the second case of the daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, I would say maybe Rabbi Akiva said that we have to suspect that she's telling the truth because daughter-in-laws don't hate their mother-in-laws that much, and so therefore we have to suspect it l'chumra. But in the case of co-wives where they really hate each other, then we can assume that they're totally lying and allow the co-wife to eat terumah. Siricha, so we need the first case to teach me that Rabbi Akiva would be machmir both ways, even in the first case of co-wives. Good. So that's why we need both examples. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shemuel, halacha ke'Rabbi Tarfon. We follow Rabbi Tarfon and we're consistent. We accept the first wife's testimony for herself, but reject it altogether for the second, and second can even continue eating terumah. Amar Abaye afana name tanena. Abaye says, I have a braita that backs up Rabbi Tarfon. Nitan li ben b'midinat hayam. A woman goes away without children with her husband, and they have no children, which means that our presumption, the chazakah going that we have before she leaves, is that if he would die, she would have to do yibum with the brother-in-law. But then she comes back and says, while I was away, I became pregnant and I gave birth and I had a child. But then after that, they were away for a while, met bini ba'achar kach met ba'ali. But then my son died, and then my husband died. Since the son died first, so she is not with child when the husband dies, so she can do yibum. So ne'emen that she's believed. The reason is because she's not changing the chazakah. The presumptive status when she left is she has no child, so she would be permitted to do yibum. And so here, even though the presumptive status changed in the middle, we only know that based on her own testimony. So therefore we can believe that her testimony that she had a child and that the child died, and therefore we can permit her to do yibum. But if the other way around, if she said ba'ali v'achar kach beni ena ne'emenet, if she said she left without a child, she says, oh, on the trip I had a child, and then my husband died, and then my son died, and we can't verify any of this. In that case, she's not believed, because this would mean that she would not do yibum, because when the husband died, she had a child, and she can go marry someone else without yibum, without chalitza. But that is different. That's a change from the presumptive status that she had when she went away. When she went away, we assume she has no child. She comes back and says she in fact had a child when the husband died, so she's not believed. In the second case, she is not believed, but she's not believed totally. We do suspect that maybe she's telling the truth, and therefore she can't do yibum either, because maybe in fact it's true that first her husband died and then the son died, so she can't do yibum because she'll be exempt from yibum, it'd be prohibited. So she has to do chalitza and not yibum. That's the end of the Braita. Now the Gemara analyzes and says, we worry about her own words for herself, but for if it was a co-wife that said that, well, then we wouldn't worry at all. Shema mina. So you see, this would follow the inference from this Baraita agrees with Rabbi Tarfon that the testimony of one wife does not apply at all to the co-wife, and we're not even concerned about it, even to prohibit in teruma. All right, and now we get to the next Mishnah. קידש אחת מחמש נשים ואין יודע איזו קידש. כל אחת אומרת אותי קידש. A man did kiddushin with a woman, one of 5 women, and after that he doesn't know which one it was. For some reason they got mixed up, I don't know, and so each one of them says, oh, he did kiddushin with me. Each one wants to claim that she was the one. I guess they're going to have a monetary benefit, because then they can collect the ketuvah. Only one of them is telling the truth, but we don't know which one it is. So in this case, noten get lechol achat ve'achat, he definitely has to give a get to each and every one of them, because any one of them might be the one who he has kiddushin to or not. But what about the payment of the ketuvah? They're all claiming it. Maniach ketuvah benehen umistalek. Rabbi Tarfon says that he can, if the ketuvah was 200 zuz, he puts 200 zuz on the table and he leaves. It doesn't mean literally on the table. It means he would give it to Betin, and he says, okay, I paid my ketuvah. I don't know which of you it is. If one of you can prove it, then you'll take it. If you can't prove it, then they'll split it among them. But he fulfilled his obligation by giving them all a get and paying the ketuvah once, because he only obligated himself to one ketuvah. Okay, Rabbi Akiva Omer, enzo derech mosi mideh avera. Similar to the previous cases, Rabbi Akiva says, no, you have to be more stringent than that. This is not a way to get someone out of a transgression. He's obligated. He's obligated to one of the women to pay a ketubah, and now each one is only getting 1/5 of the ketubah. That's not fair. They're not getting what's coming to them. He has to give not only a get, but he has to pay out the ketubah to each and every one, because he has to make sure that whichever one he did kiddushin to, he obligated her. So I mean, the question is really who has the burden of proof. Rabbi Tarfon says the women have the burden of proof. They're the ones that want to take the money. Rabbi Akiva says no, he obligated himself. He has to prove which one it is. If he can't prove, he has to pay all of them. That's case number one. They disagree about a similar case. Gazal echad mechamisha ve'en yodea me'eze gazal. A man stole money from someone, but he doesn't actually know who he stole it from, right? He pickpocketed someone, but then he felt bad and he wants to give it back. But there was 5 people there, and he was not careful to see which one he stole from. So kol echad omer oti gazal. Each one of the men said he stole from me. Now 4 of these men are lying, but they all want to collect the payment from the gazlan, and we don't know which one it is. So what's the responsibility of the thief? If he stole $100, so he leaves the $100 and he says, I fulfilled my obligation to pay back what I need to. He gives it to court, and then they can split it among themselves. Rabbi Akiva says, no, the burden is you can't get yourself out of the transgression. You're a thief. You stole $100 from someone. You have to make restitution to that person. You don't know who you stole from? That's your problem. You shouldn't have stolen in the first place. Or maybe you should have been more careful to know who you stole from. And therefore, it's not the burden of proof is not on the person that was stolen, but rather on the thief. And he has to pay each and every one of them the full amount that he owes. Okay, good. So now that's the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to analyze this Mishnah, these 2 cases, and note that the second case, the guy did something wrong. He stole. So there, it makes more sense to agree with Rabbi Akiva to say he has to pay back each one of them, because right, it makes more sense to fine him. And the burden of proof should be upon him. In the first case here, he did kiddushin. Assuming he did kiddushin with money, that's not a sin. He didn't do anything wrong. It could be an honest mistake. He did kiddushin, and now he's just not sure which woman that was when he did it. And so there's less of a reason to give him a fine or to penalize him or put the burden of proof upon him in the first case. So that's what the Gemara will analyze this comparison. So Kidesh Katani, Baal Lo Katani. Notice that it says Kidesh, which we assume means that he did Kiddushin with money. That's the proper way that the rabbi, even though it's a Dirabanan way of doing Kiddushin, the rabbi said that's the proper way. And it doesn't say he did Kiddushin through Bi'ah. Bi'ah, even though that's the biblical way of doing Kiddushin, the rabbis said we should refrain from that. It's a denigrating way to do Kiddushin, and the rabbis even give a penalty to anyone who uses Bi'ah in order to do Kiddushin. So in the first case, he does Kiddushin in the proper way, not with Bi'ah, which is the improper way. But in the second case, Gazal Katane, Lakach Lo Katane. The second case, he does something improper. It could have brought another case similar, where he bought something. He says, so I'm going to buy this car from you, and I'll pay you. Well, I'll pay you tomorrow. So he owes someone money because he bought something. But then he comes back and he doesn't remember who he bought it from. And each one of them says, I sold it to you. Another one says, I sold you the car. You owe me the money. So in that case, he didn't steal. He bought something legitimately and just said, I'm going to pay you later. And that would be, in that case, there would be less of a reason to penalize him, less of a reason to say the burden of proof is on the buyer. Maybe the seller has to prove it. Okay, so now we're noticing that in the first case, he did the right course of action, Kiddushin with money and not with Bi'ah. In the second case, he did a wrong action, he stole. And the Gemara doesn't bring a case of where he just bought something and is paying later. Okay, Maneh Matnitin. So based on that observation, we ask, who is the author of this Mishnah? Lo Tanakama ve'lo Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. It seems that it can't be either Tanakama or Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar of the following Baraita. And here's the following Baraita. It's going to bring also these 2 cases. Tetanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer. This Baraita only brings the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Since it says it in his name, we're assuming that there is another Tana who would disagree with him. So what does he say? Lo nechleku Rabbi Tarfon ve'Rabbi Akiva al shekidesh achat mechamesh nashim ve'eno yodea ezo kidesh shemaniach ketubah benehen umistalek. In fact, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva do not disagree. They agree on a case of someone does kiddushin and he does it properly with money, but he doesn't know which one he did kiddushin with, that he pays ketubah once, and that's he fulfilled his obligation because he acted properly. Alma nechleku al shebaal. What do they do? What do they disagree? A case where he did kiddushin through bi'ah with 5 women. Rabbi Tarfon says it's the same thing. He has only an obligation to pay ketuvah to one of them. Doesn't make a difference. Rabbi Akiva says in this case, he did kiddushin in a denigrating way, inappropriate manner. In that case, we should penalize him and make him pay all 5 a ketubah. Okay, that's the first case. And the second case, this is still Rabbi Shimon ben Azad. He says, "Lo nechleku Rabbi Tarfon Rabbi Akiva al shelakach mikach mechamisha bnei adam ve'en yodeh me'ezeh mehen lakach shemer demeh mikach benehen mistalek." So too in the case of owing money to 5 other people, if he bought something and now he's paying for his purchase, where that's a proper thing to do, to buy something and then owe money because you bought something. He just doesn't know who he bought it from. Everyone agrees. Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva agree that he only has to pay once, right? And it's up to the sellers to figure out who is the real seller. Rather, the machloket is where the guy stole from one of 5 people. And Rabbi Tarfon said, in that case also, he stole money, he pays back what he owes, and that's it. He can leave. He fulfilled his obligation to make teshuvah. But in this case, Rabbi Akiva said, because he did something wrong, unlike the person who did a purchase, he is a thief. So he has to pay back each and every one. It makes sense to penalize him and put the burden of proof on him. So we see that according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Akiva agrees with Rabbi Tarfon in the case where the man did something appropriate. He only disagrees in the 2 cases where he does something inappropriate, kiddushin with bi'ah, and the thief. That's one opinion. Now, this Baraita doesn't quote Tanakama, but we can infer that since Rabbi Shimon ben Lazar says that they agree in the case where he does something appropriate, kiddushin with money and buying, so there's no disagreement there. It must be that Tanakama thinks that Rabbi Akiva disagrees in the case where they do something appropriate. And so, when he does kiddushin with money, or he buys something, Rabbi Akiva would say, even in that case, you have to pay all 5. In the case where he does something inappropriate, kiddushin with bi'ah, or steal something, Rabbi Tarfon would agree that he has to pay all 5. Okay, so that's the machloket between Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar of where to apply the machloket between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva. All right, now that we know all these opinions, let's go back to our Mishnah. Tanakama, is our Mishnah authored by Tanakama? If so, litne kiddush velakach. Then it should say the cases of doing kiddushin with money and buying with and paying back for something you bought, the 2 permitted cases, and say that's where Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon disagree. But our Mishnah doesn't say that. It says Kiddush and it says Gazal. So it can't be Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar litni Baal veGazal. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, they disagree in the 2 cases where he acts inappropriately. In that case, it should say doing kiddushin with bi'ah and gazal, but it doesn't. Our Mishnah says bi'ah says kiddushin with money and gazal. So our Mishnah seems to take half of one opinion and half of the other, and it is inconsistent. So we answer simply, Le'olam Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Umay Kidesh bebi'ah. No, in fact, the entire Mishnah can be Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says that they disagree in cases where the man did something inappropriate. That's where Rabbi Akiva says he has to pay all 5, and Rabbi Tarfon says even if he did something inappropriate, he only has to pay 1. And what about the first case where it says Kiddush? All along, we were assuming that Kiddush means a proper way. But not necessarily. Kiddush is an ambiguous term. And it could equally mean Kiddush through Bi'ah. And it's inappropriate. And so that's what it means. Okay, good. So that solves that problem of authorship. And now just the last problem of why do we need both cases, right? Just tell me one of them and I could figure out the other one also. It's the same principle. If you do something inappropriate, but you don't know who you owe the money to, you have to pay all 5 according to the Rabbi Akiva and only 1 according to the Rabbi Tarfon. Why do you need both cases of kiddushin and of stealing? Tana kidesh lo diacha kocho de Rabbi Akiva. So we need the first case of doing kiddushin to teach me how strongly Rabbi Akiva says his opinion. Dafagav disur drabanan avad kanis. It's only a sudraba midoraita. You could do kiddushin with bi'ah. The rabbis came and says this is not an appropriate way to do kiddushin, and so even though he only violated a drabanan, still we penalize him and say you have to pay all 5. So we need the first case to teach me that Rabbi Akiva would say that, even in that case of the Rabbanan. Tana gazal odiacha kocho Rabbi Tarfon. I need the second case of stealing to teach me the strength of Rabbi Tarfon's opinion. It goes so far, tafagav disura deoraita avad lakanis, even though he violates a deoraita law of stealing, and nevertheless, we don't penalize him, right? It's some terrible deoraita thing. You might think, oh, then he should pay all 5. No, even in that case, he doesn't know who it is. He paid his money back. And it's not his problem that there are fakers coming and saying he owes me the money he stole from me. Not his problem, and we do not penalize him even in that case. All right, last Mishnah Ha'isha shel Chahi u'ba'ala l'medinat hayam u'bna imahem u'bat ve'amra met ba'ali v'achar kach met beni ne'emenet. So this is more with the chazakah, the presumed status before they left. A woman goes on a trip with her husband, and they have a son with them. So when they leave, we assume, look, she has a son, which would mean if the husband should die, she would not do yibum, she would be able to go free. When she's on the trip, she says, my husband died, and then my son died, which means at that point when her husband died, she had a son, so she is permitted to marry out and doesn't have to do yibum or chalitza. She's believed because she is confirming the same chazakah that she had when she left. She could have just said, my husband died. She didn't have to even report the second thing regarding her son dying. And so she is believed because that is consistent with the chazakah. Met beni ve'achar kach met bali. But if she goes away with a child, so her chazakah, she has a child. If she comes back and says, first my son died, and then my husband died, and therefore I can do yibum. I must do yibum because my husband died. I had no children. He had no children. And she's not believed, but we suspect that maybe she's not fully believed. But we suspect that maybe she's telling the truth, and therefore, she cannot do yibum. Another case. Nitan li ben b'minat. She left on a trip with her husband without a child. So her presumptive status is that if the husband would die, she would do yibum, because she has no child. But then, we quoted this Mishnah just earlier, but then, while she's on the trip, she says, I had a child on the trip. But then after I had gave birth to the child died, and then my husband died. She's believed. And therefore, since at this point she died, husband died without children, she can do yibum, and she's believed because she is simply confirming the presumptive status that she had when she left. Met bali v'achar kach met bini. But if in that case she says, first my husband died, and then my son died, and she is not believed because she left without a child. She says, oh, I had a child while I was there, and my husband died, and only after that the child died. In that case, she went with a presumptive status that she has no child, and now she's saying, when my husband died, I had a child, therefore I don't have to do yibum, I can go marry out. She's changing the presumptive status. She is not fully believed, but we suspect that maybe she's telling the truth. So she has to do chalitza to break the zikah, but she not do yibum, and then she can go and remarry. Nitan li yavam b'medinat hayam. If a woman goes away with her mother-in-law and her husband, and while they're on a trip, she says, oh, my mother-in-law had a son. So she goes away with the presumption that she has no brothers-in-law, which would mean if her husband would die, she could go marry anyone, because if her husband has no brother, so there's no yibum. And now she says that status changed while we were on the trip. We had my brother had a younger baby brother was born. My husband had a younger baby brother that was born, and now she would have to do yibum. In that case, if she testifies, Amra met ba'ali v'achar kach met Yevami v'achar kach ba'ali ne'emenet. No matter what, it doesn't matter the order in this case because in the end they're both dead. So if she says, my husband died first, and then my brother-in-law, the baby, or my brother-in-law, and then my husband, she is believed because she left with the presumptive status that she has no brothers-in-law, and therefore she's coming back and confirming, I have no brothers-in-law. And even if her husband dies first, in which case, during that time period, she would have to do yibum, but then that brother-in-law died, so then that breaks the zikah. And certainly, if the brother-in-law died first, then there would be no yibum because the husband died without any brothers. Either way, she's believed because when she left, we assume she has no brothers-in-law and no yibum. And now when she comes back, she's simply confirming it. So there's no reason to disbelieve her. However, if she went on a trip with her husband and she had a brother-in-law who also went on the trip, so now she's leaving with a presumptive status that she would have to do yibum. If she comes back and says, Amra met ba'ali v'achar kach Yevami, Yevami v'achar kach ba'ali, enan emenet. When she comes back and said they both died, doesn't matter which order she says it in, she is not believed. She'en ha'isha ne'emet lomar met Yevami shetinaseh. Because a woman is not believed to say, my brother-in-law died, to allow her, to permit her to go and get remarried. So therefore, since she left with the presumptive status that she has a brother-in-law, she comes back, we have to assume that the brother-in-law may still be alive and would have to get some kind of chalitza in order to remarry. Velo meta achota shetikanes lebeto. She is also not believed to say, my sister died, so that she can replace her sister, right? If she goes away on a trip, whatever, her sister is married to a man. She comes back from the trip and says, my sister died, and so now I'm going to marry my sister's husband, which would be permitted if in fact the sister died. But we do not allow that, because we only allow the testimony of a wife regarding her own husband, because we don't want her to be an aguna. She's going to wait forever for her husband who's missing to come home, so we permit it. But in this case, she's not an aguna. She can marry anybody else. She just can't marry her sister's husband. And so we don't believe her in that case. A man is not believed to say, my brother died, and therefore, without children, therefore he says to the wife, you have to do yibum with me. No, a man is not believed to say that. He is not an agun. He can marry anybody he wants. So we do not allow the testimony of one witness in any of these cases. Velo meta ishto sheyisa achota. And also, the husband of a wife is not believed to say, oh, my wife died, and then permit him to marry his wife's sister. Because again, he is not an agun. He can marry anybody else. He just can't marry his wife's sister unless there is full proof that in fact she died. Okay, so that's a very important principle, that we believe one witness, including the wife herself, only to prevent an aguna with her husband, but not in any of these other cases. And now we end the Gemara with some a very important case and then some agadah. Be'amine Rava merav Nachman hamzakeh get leishto bimkom yavam mahu. Some is called the get zikui. There is a principle that zakin la'adam shelo befanav, I can acquire something for another person, even without his knowing, if it is for their benefit. So if I see, a watch on the street that's lost and identified, and I say, I'm going to pick up this watch, on behalf of my friend, I know he likes this type of watch, even without my friend knowing it, that watch is acquired for him, and it belongs to him for all legal matters, even though he did not know about it, because it's a benefit for him, as opposed to chavin, I can't do something that will be to the detriment of my friend without their knowing about it. This is true regarding a get as well. If a man, for example, is on his deathbed, and says, I'm about to die, my wife is not around here, and I want to give a get to you as a shaliach on behalf of my wife, please accept this get on her behalf. Now, a wife can certainly send a messenger, an agent, to receive the get for her. For sure that can work. A man can also send an agent to give a get. In this case, she did not send a messenger to receive a get. But the man says to a random guy, you be the messenger, accept the get on behalf of my wife. Why? Because I'm about to die, and we have no children. And therefore, if I die, she will have to be involved in yibum and chalitza, and my brother's going to give her a hard time or whatever. I'd rather not put her through that trouble. So this is actually a benefit for her, and in that case, the question is, can we consider this a benefit for her so that a man can receive the get even without her knowledge, on the principle that we can benefit someone even without their agreement. So here's the two sides of the issue. Can we assume that a woman is always going to hate her brother-in-law and not want to marry him, and therefore this is a benefit for her, and we can merit someone even without their knowledge? But not always. Sometimes a wife may actually love her brother-in-law, and she would want to do yibum, and in that case, chovula, this is a detriment to her. If we asked her, we would say, no, I don't want to get, I want to be able to do yibum, and so we cannot assume it. So what's the question? Can we assume that they always hate their brother-in-laws, or not always? Amar le Tanina. So Rav Nachman answered Rava, we actually have a braita that can give us guidance here. V'chosheshin lid vareha v'choleset v'lo mityabemet. Actually, is the Mishnah. Our Mishnah that we just read said that the court suspects that she may be telling the truth in both opposite cases. Both when she gives testimony about herself that she can do yibum, and when she gives testimony about herself that she does not need to do yibum and can go free, the court says, well, maybe it's true, maybe she's lying, and therefore she has to do chalitza and cannot do yibum. So you see that we suspect her, she may be lying both ways. Maybe she'll lie so that she can do yibum. Maybe she'll lie so that she doesn't have to do yibum and she could remarry. Meaning it depends on the case. Sometimes they want they want to be with their brother-in-law. Sometimes they hate their brother-in-laws, and therefore we cannot assume that in this case the get is good because maybe she hates him. We can't assume it's not good because maybe she loves him. Therefore, if someone gives a get like this, we have to be machmir and suspect that the get is good, but require chalitza, and would not be able to do yibum and would have to do chalitza in such a case. All right, this is a very important concept of get zikoi. There was a case a couple of years ago in Israel of a rabbi who permitted a get zikoi, not like this. The guy was not only deathbed, he was even in a vegetative state, and they decided that the court could give, so now he can't give a get because he's not conscious. But one rabbi decided that a court can give her a get on his behalf, because if he were alive, surely he would not want his wife to be in aguna, and so this is a get zikui. But that was a very controversial case, and very few people agreed that is a legitimate thing to do. But it was at least a modern day example of an attempted application of this concept of get zikui. All right, lastly, Amar le Ravina le Rava, Hamzake get lishtob makom ketata mahu. What if a man gives a get on behalf of his wife to an agent without her knowledge, and they were fighting? We defined what fighting means already before. So we know this couple is fighting, and then the husband, they're not together. The husband says an agent, you know what? I want to forget about this marriage, this fighting all the time, accept this get for my wife. Do we assume that that's a benefit for her? Mahu, since they're fighting, so this is a benefit. She's like, oh, finally, get me a get. This is for sure. She would agree to it, even without her presence, without her sending an agent. It's a valid get. Or maybe she would say her physical comfort is preferable. She would, even though they're fighting and it's very annoying, she would nevertheless prefer to be married, to have first of all the benefits of the ketubah, that she gets food and clothing and shelter, and to have physical companionship. Even though they're fighting, she'd rather have the married status and be with someone than not have the fighting and be alone. So that's the question. Here's the answer. Tashema damar resh lakish tab lemetav tandu mid lemetav armelu. Famous statement, appears in other contexts as well. And it says it is better to sit. Tandu is a Persian word. It means two bodies. It's better to have two bodies together than to be alone as a almana, to be a widow or a divorcee. So the point is, a woman prefers companionship of any husband. Better to be married, even if it's not the happiest of marriages, than to be alone. And therefore, this get would not be valid. She has to come and agree, yes, I want the get. Otherwise, maybe she'll say, I know we're fighting a lot and all the time, well, but I still rather be married than single. Abaye Amar. So backing up the statement of Resh Lakish, we have a few other folk sayings about the benefits of marriage for a wife, for a woman. Amar Abaye de shum shemana gabra kurse becharata remu la. Even if a husband is as small as an ant, even if he's not a very impressive person, nevertheless his wife will place her seat among noblemen. She's proud to be married, even if her husband is not a nobleman, and even if he's not very important and not very rich, she still takes pride in being married. Rav Papa Amad de Nafsa Gabra. Rav Papa similarly said, even if someone's husband is a wool comber, the lowest job, just sit and comb wool all day. Tikre b'sefer baba v'teteb. Nevertheless, she calls him and says, "Come sit with me on the porch to show everyone. Look, I'm a married woman." She'd rather be married, and she doesn't mind if her husband has a lowly job. Rav Asher Omer Tekul sa gabra lo baya talpeche lekidra. Someone whose husband sells cabbage, again, he has very little money, he sells very cheap vegetables. She's okay with that, and she doesn't require lentils for a pot. Lentils is also not very expensive, but she can't even afford that. She's okay. She's happily married, even if she just has to eat cabbage. And if she can't afford so much, she'd rather be married than not. Tana becholan mezanot vetolot bebalehen. Braita says quite a negative statement that says all of these people, you know why these women really want to be married? So that they can commit adultery. And they say, when they have a child from adultery, they say, it's with my husband. If they're alone, if they're not married, and they're with men, and then they have a child, everybody will know that this child was born from promiscuous relations, and so they want to be married to hide their promiscuity. All right, that's a pretty negative reason, but the other reasons just talk about the pride of being married. Hadran alach ha'isha shalom baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.